Baptist Church. Matt Cobb coming to you with another daily devotion. Picking back up in James. We've been working through this for a while, and if we keep going at this pace, we're going to be in here for another long time, but it's okay because there's so much good stuff in the book of James. So I want to pick up looking in chapter 1, verses 16 through 18. It says, "So don't be misled, my dear brothers and sisters. Whatever is good and perfect is a gift coming down to us from God our Father, who created all the lights in the heavens. He never changes or casts a shifting shadow. He chose to give birth to us by giving us his true word, and we, out of all creation, became his prized possession." So I just want to highlight some quick things out of this section. And it's really interesting. I love how James jumps right into it and says, don't be misled. Or some translations say even don't be deceived, which means to say that there is a possibility that we can be deceived or that there is somebody trying to mislead us. And that's not only, and maybe sometimes ourselves, but also Satan and the spiritual forces that are trying to deceive us, to mislead us, to think things contrary to what God is trying to tell you. And that's the great thing that we can lean onto, is that God never lies to us. He never has, never will. Others may, but God always tells us the truth. So we can always trust him and trust his word. And then another thing that we can see is that God is the source of all the good things in our life. Look at that in verse 17 says, whatever is good and perfect is a gift coming down to us from God our Father. And I love how James puts this in direct contrast to what he had just talked about, how the temptation and the trials and tribulations that we face in our lives, the temptation is those things that spring up from inside of us that lead us astray. You know, the desires that well up in us, that we need to replace those desires with the Holy Spirit's desires. But James is drawing this contrast, showing us that the good things in our lives don't spring up from inside of us, except that it's the Holy Spirit in us. But God is that source of all the good things, in contrast to the sin that springs up from our own sinful nature. And then also, God is constant. God never changes. That last part of verse 17 says, he never changes or casts a shifting shadow. I read some commentaries just briefly about this, kind of using this illustration of casts a shifting shadow in contrast to creating the heavenly lights. So kind of creating the eclipse, or that shadow that can, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting thought. But regardless of whether it's talking about an actual shadow or eclipse or whatever, the thing that we can hold true is that God is constant. He never changes, which then also means that his love for us never changes. And that's a comforting thing to know, that not only do the things around us may swirl and chaos may happen, that God is constant. His love, him fighting for us, is always constant. And then also, his word to us is the best gift that we could ever receive. God is the giver of all good and perfect gifts, but his word to us is the very best gift. And James even talks about that when he goes on in verse 18, says he chose to give birth to us by giving us his true word. And so I like how James is just laying this out here, that sin creeps up from inside of us. Everything good comes from God. And the best thing that he could give us was his word. And the correlation of Jesus, in John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jesus is the living embodiment of the Bible, of that word to us. And so the best thing that we can have is Jesus given to us. And then last, I love how he kind of capstones this out and says, and we, meaning you, me, all of us, out of all of creation, became his prized possession. I mean, the God who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, who owns everything, creation is all his. we are his prized possession. We are the most important thing to God of everything. And so let me just encourage you this week that no matter what you may be going through, no matter what life may be tossing at you, don't be deceived. God is the source of all the good things in our lives. God is constant. He doesn't change. And so his love for us is always the same. And his word, Jesus being in our lives, is the best gift that the giver of all good gifts could give us. And we are the most important thing of all of creation. So lots to chew on and think about more throughout this week, but I hope you have a blessed time. I hope this has been encouraging to you, and I hope that we'll be able to, as we kind of dig more into James about listening and doing of the word, that it'll be encouraging to you. So have a great weekend, and we'll catch you later.